Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Wise Words book reviews. Today we are going to be reviewing none other than Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me by Carol Tavris and Eliot Aronson. Now this book is amazing. I absolutely loved it, and I know Jess did too, and we definitely recommend it to anyone. They really dive into human behaviour and talk about self-justification, false memories, cognitive dissonance, and much more. You see, when we take an action, we usually have a reason to do so. However, a lot of the time, that reason is post hoc. It is made up after the action has actually occurred. Interestingly, the reasons that we tell ourselves tend to be in line with how we see ourselves. We all see ourselves as saints that could do no wrong. However, we all know that isn't quite true, as we all slip up and make mistakes here and there. Instead, we tend to choose reasons that are more emotionally pleasing, or ones that make ourselves seem better than we actually are. We make our past look worse so that our present self seem better. Now, if that sounds interesting or that resonates with you, and it should, do give it a listen, and if you enjoy it, please do give us a like, a comment, a subscribe, or a follow. It would really make our day. But anyways, enough of me. Here is Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me. Alright, so it's pretty, well, the like core theme is pretty much in the title right there. It's all about like self-justification. This book, I think like we were saying, like I read it like 3 years ago, and it's pretty, like it's a great book to read, like really interesting, and it has some like incredible examples of people on like different levels of like processing, like examples of people like justifying certain actions. And I guess like, you know, a perfect example is like the Nazis justifying their actions. And I guess it ties in a lot with what you said in terms of like ideologies, basically the ends, like the means. No, the means are justified to get the result.
Yeah,
basically.
Justified. Yeah, the means justify the end. Or the I think that is the way. The means justify the ends. Or the means are justified by the end. Yeah, like it no matter. Yeah, you know, you can do anything to justify the end goal, which is the utopian vision that you have. I'm trying to think. One of the first quotes I got from the book, by the way, I will look at any additional evidence to confirm the opinion to which I've already come. So this for me, this this book was all about confirmation bias and the way we
act that out.
Act it out, but also the way we use it in more ways than just one. We almost use it like some people think of. I was going to say we use it almost to kid ourselves about past decisions we've made, and I think it's interesting because the confirmation bias in this also takes like a sort of moral dimension to it, in the sense that you look for evidence to prove. Well, I think one of the main theses or main things about this book was talking about in the court situation, wasn't it? It was mainly around decisions based by police and judges. I think that was the main sort of extreme examples they were using, where it was they basically, for example, it was the judge, they put somebody behind bars who came out or turned out, 5 years down the line that they never did anything wrong. And it was sort of discussing how this person came to terms with the fact that they made such a mistake, not because it was obvious that when they put them away. It's more the fact that once they realized this person was innocent, how did they react to that information, right? And if I remember correctly, the main way they reacted, both on the judge level and also the policemen, who were the people who were sort of obviously providing the evidence to put the person who went to jail away, they were straight up in denial that they ever, made a mistake, if I'm correct.
Exactly. I think like a core theme of this book that she kind of introduces in the introduction is that, we all love to see ourselves in this positive light, that we all have these like virtuous traits. that we're all very honest, and we're basically like the perfect citizen in a way. But obviously this does not hold true through all contexts of our life, and we act irrationally sometimes, or like impulsively, which go against our kind of core beliefs. And the core theme of this book, I would say, is that you have this core belief, let's say, I'm not a liar, and then you lie. And so you have this contradiction between these two, like, a previous held belief and something that you've just done. And so it's like, well, how do you, it's like you've got this model of the world. This is how I see it. You've got a model of the world and a model of you and how you act. And then you've got something contradictory to it. And you can either integrate it and update your model, but which takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, and it's like painful to admit that you were wrong or something like that.
Well, it's painful to contemplate that you are not moral in a certain way, that you lied. Well, exactly. Right? It's painful to admit that you lied.
And so then, or you can basically filter this information, this contradictory information, into like a perfect form so that it just fits into your model, and so nothing changes. And I think the whole idea, is that we either choose which one. We either choose our previous held belief, or we fit this in, and it makes it like nice and neat, but we never actually change that way, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting in terms of the when you talk about this idea of like, let's just say you lied and you consider yourself not to be a liar, right? Her main point is not only that you don't integrate it. What you then do is you create a list of self-justifications for why you did it.
Yeah.
Or you look for evidence to give you almost an excuse, right? So I think this is the where I got more interesting for me was she talked about this idea of like, how would somebody lose their ethical compass or their moral compass in terms of like, we all have like a boundary between what's right and wrong. So like, obviously people will be like, oh, it's wrong to lie. Okay. And then obviously once you lie once, you then have to, why did you lie? Okay. And then you'll think, okay, I got a reason for this. The reason was, if I didn't lie, this would have happened.
Yeah. Or it's like, it wasn't really a lie. It was like.
Exactly like that. You create yourself a little reason for why it was necessary to lie, or why it was necessary to break a rule or break an identity constraint you have on yourself. Okay. And it's this idea that over time, the more you repeat that, the more you start, playing around with the rules and when you can break them, when you can't. So I think one of the quotes which I took from the book was like, how do you get an honest man to lose his ethical compass or morality? So you get them to take it one step at a time, and self-justification will do the rest. And I think this is what links in with the sort of Peterson stuff, which is what Jordan Peterson always talks about. It's the what's the name of the Russian, the Russian gulags, and the whole societal system where they were basically, people were informing on each other and they were sent into prison camps and stuff. And he talks about how this is like, how you could do that to somebody else is you self-justify it, right? And it's the same with the sort of Hitler and the Nazis. They all create up these elaborate little mini reasons why they're behaving in a specific way. And it just, the deeper you go down with those reasons, the harder it is to ever get back up to the top, which is where you're a good person, right? You start breaking all these rules.
Yeah.
And it's like in a weird way, it's a descent to hell. Like in the symbolic religious meaning, it's like the more you sort of lie, you're descending down to hell by essentially lying to yourself.
Yeah, like you're taking one step out at a time.
There's many angels you see in movies. Like there's the devil and there's the angel. One of them's an angel, one of them's the devil on your shoulder. I always like to think of it as like the angel's the one telling you like just look at the truth, like see it for what it is, and the devil's always the one in there giving you a little self-justification, like, oh, it's okay to do that right now. I mean, I swear that was in is The Emperor's New Groove, I think, if I remember it correctly. Like,
yeah, no, literally, I was going to say,
literally has it.
But the big guy, didn't the big guy have like?
Yeah, he has like a good and evil one all the time. Oh, I think it is Kronk. Yeah. I think it is Kronk. Wait.
Yeah, the big guy. It is, and it is that. It's like you're taking one step out at a time, and I like this. This ties in well with a study by Milgram. I think I sent you a video the other day, actually, of like basically seeing how authority affects someone's decision making, and whether they kind of go against their like previous held beliefs. So, for instance, what would occur is that some guy would be linked up to an electric shock kind of machine. And if he got a question wrong, then the participant would flick a switch of 15 volts. And this voltage went up to 450 volts, and which is lethal.
Yeah.
In England,
which was lethal, wasn't it? It was enough. It's meant to be lethal.
Well, in England, it's 240 volts, which can kill you. So I think what's interesting is that you can't start at 450 volts. It's got to be accumulative. And I think there were like three main factors that made obedience occur. It's like the proximity to the victim, which is like, it ties in with the molecule of more. Being more distant makes you less empathetic. So, you're kind of held back. Then there's immediacy.
It's why the internet's increased the amount of fraud.
Exactly. And the amount of anonymity.
In the sense that, they don't see that they don't see the sufferer, so that it's easier to be immoral. But continue.
Exactly. And then I think, so there was proximity, there's immediacy. So basically you don't have time to really think about it. You react very impulsively, which you could also tie in with today's society of being very kind of like, doesn't have a long attention span. We're all very impulsive. We all we all comment, and it's so easy to comment and like and do all these things very quickly. And then I think the last one was like, accumulation, like gradual. So if you start at the 15 and then you go to 30 and then you go to 45, it's much easier because you wouldn't just jump in and just kill someone from nothing, but you can justify it because it's like, oh, wow, I've gone all the way up to 300. I can justify another 15. I can justify another 15. And it's that kind of attitude that's like, that we justify to ourselves. We take one step out and we justify it. We don't take 30 steps out straight away. But then as we get to 30 steps, well, then we can't turn back because we've caused all this damage.
Well, but this is the point as well, because I was going to say, like, so an example of that, right, is every small step you take. So, for example, it could be something like, let's just say, I'm just trying to think of a correct example here. So let's just say, right, you are somebody who takes or took illegal drugs, and you bought one extra or something, or of a substance. Let's just say it was a pill, and then you sold one to your mate. Okay, you technically, in the eyes of the law, gave somebody a drug, so you're a drug dealer, right? And you rationalize it, be like, oh, he's my friend. Okay, next thing you do is you buy more, and then you're giving it to more of your friends this time. Oh, just rationalize it. It's just my friends. Then it's a friend of a friend.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, well, I've already given it to my friends, so it's just a friend of a friend. Next thing you know, you're the local drug dealer. And the point here is you haven't ever had to. It's not. I think actually the most interesting way to think about it is, you don't have to integrate a massive moral change. So, for example, if you went straight to just selling to everybody, there's no way you could have integrated, I'm not a drug dealer, to obviously you're a drug dealer. There's no way those match. Whereas the small steps mean I'm not a drug dealer, and you can feed in these little mini sort of lies, which still builds it up. And
it's easier to filter through.
Yeah. And I think it's, you're right, by the way, about this linking a lot to the Beyond Order and like the Peterson stuff and almost the religious stuff of like the good and evil, in the sense of like, to me is very obvious. The easiest way to end up being immoral or doing behavior which would be frowned upon is doing it very slowly, or not slowly, but, doing one small step at a time and letting your brain rationalize it, because that's all it is. It's small steps towards behaving bad. Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of other examples. The drug one was pretty obvious to me. I'm just trying to think. Maybe even stealing then could be one. You could be like, somebody left £2 out on their desk. I stole 10p of it because I was desperate and I needed to, get the bus home. I needed that 10p. And then where does that stop? You've done it once. Now it's like, 50p. This time I need a Diet Coke at lunch. I'm going to do it. Or, you could even, I don't know if you've read the book Predictably Irrational by Daniel O'Reilly or O'Reilly, I can't even remember pronounce his name. But he talks about how it's also easier to steal things when it's not directly related to money. So if there was a Coke in the fridge, people are more likely to take it because it's once removed from money than somebody who, would steal a fiver left on somebody's desk. Somebody would take, fine, actually that's the wrong way of thinking about it. The price of a Coke, let's say it's £1. More people are more likely to steal the Coke than the pound, because stealing the pound is actually seen as stealing. Whereas the Coke, you could be like, I borrowed it. I'm going to get you one back.
Yeah.
almost. I find it quite interesting because that is actually the slippery slope of how it begins.
That's interesting, yeah.
Once you break your moral code once, you do slip into a descent of like, I've done it before.
It's easier to justify next time.
You could probably argue the same with relationships potentially, and somebody who maybe doesn't see themselves as a cheater maybe and does it once and goes, oh, hang on a second, like, I'm still not a cheater or something. I mean, I'm not saying that if you did it once or twice that you are. It's just more, I feel like that's the logical steps that kind of go through their head, and eventually they're like, oh, well,
yeah,
I'm still not, because I don't know, they can't come up with some reason for why they're not. But that's kind of the way it goes. You do the action, you rationalize why you did it, you make yourself still out to be a good person. It's like, I guess the main thing is you have this idea of yourself, like you said, this reality that you believe, this model. And it's like, instead of, this new information comes in, it's not too catastrophic. It's not like too different. Like, you've obviously made a huge mistake. Yeah. So you then just come up with a reason. You still keep yourself nice and safe.
Well, it's almost like there's a small little gate.
Yeah. Yeah. Rather than, because otherwise if it was such a big, I guess the argument is if two ideas are the complete opposite, they can't fit. But if one sort of, you can shape it in to fit into like maybe like a bit like Tetris, you can put it into the self concept more easily if it's like a small mistake that was made, but not by me. Anyway,
if you picture the ideal person, right, with these kind of virtuous traits, it points you in the direction of, that all these traits are like directed in. So, honor and all these different traits. And then when you justify something else, your direction goes slightly off. And so then you're following in that direction, which is not, and the further you go, the further you are from your original position. It's like, I think I remember someone telling me that like if a plane differed from one degree, it would end up in a completely different area like 8 hours later.
Yeah.
And you're kind of doing that here. It's like, you have one direction, but if you go slightly ajar by justifying these things, and the more you justify, the more you kind of differ in that direction, then you're going to end up in a completely different place than where you originally wanted. And this can be tied in with like 12 rules for life in terms of you're not where you think you want to be, And so it causes this rift causes this kind of anxiety.
Yeah, I guess you could also argue back to what you said about this ideal. You have this ideal version of yourself. And if you don't quite live up to your ideal, how do you integrate the fact that you haven't done what the ideal you would have done? And that's where I feel like this like idea of like self-justification comes in.
Yeah.
Do you keep your ideal, or do you admit that you made a mistake and try and figure out how to not make the mistake again? If that makes sense. So do you confront the truth and realize that you made a mistake and that you're the sole, not sole, but you are responsible relatively for your part in the mistake? Are you somebody who then justifies it and doesn't even realize you made a mistake?
Yeah, exactly. It's quite. I remember you said once that what's it called? That we basically act differently in different situations. So we can have a liberal view towards one thing, and we can have a conservative view towards another.
Yeah,
which is, I would say, slightly hypocritical. But are you supposed to act the same in every single circumstance?
I think the main quote of that was like, people are more liberal with their family. No, that's it. You're socialist with your family, you're liberal with your local community, and you're conservative with the wider world, or something like that.
So the closer the proximity, the more liberal you are.
Basically, because your kin is something you're more likely biologically inclined to want to share with. That's my at least thesis behind it. And then your local community, you still want to be fairly liberal. In the sense of, I guess you could almost argue the liberality is driven by, not wanting to feel envious towards people who are doing really well off in the local community, potentially. But I do, I think it's just interesting how people's political views do change depending on the sort of the relations
context.
The context. There's no context-free politics, I think, was what is a Taleb quote, actually. There's no context-free politics, and it's an interesting thought experiment. Because, you are, not every family, but most families tend to be quite socialistic in the sense of, like, everything's distributed, like dinner's distributed between everybody, but made by one. Do you get what I mean? It's not like everybody's cooking their own meals in the same house. Like, the kids are cooking their own meals, and it's like everybody for themselves. Like,
yeah.
So, yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't know what your point was there.
I was just interested because, like, obviously, in this, in what we're talking about is like choosing two different examples. Like, you've got two different examples and you're picking one, but like that seems to be the case throughout many different types of contexts. And so, does that hold out throughout all contexts, or is it supposed to change in different contexts? I know that sounds kind of confusing.
It does sound kind of confusing, but I think I get what you mean. Like, does it continue to change across contexts? Is that what you're saying? Like, because
this book, I would say, is like, it's kind of abstract in the terms that, like, you're in a context and then you have two conflicting ideas and you've got to choose one. So let's say honor, and you choose it in one. Are you supposed to act that same exact way in all contexts if, we naturally do?
I guess with this one particularly, in terms of this, the particular examples he uses in this book tend to be more about self-esteem, I would say, than many things. So in the sense of, like, you're a judge, you believe yourself to be a good person. Like, your self-image, right, was that you were a good person, yet you put somebody behind bars for 20 years of their life and they've just come out. So basically you have to live with the fact that you are a good person, you make wise decisions, and even though you are that person, you've sent somebody unjustly to prison for 20 years of their life and they're not going to get that time back. Yeah. How do you take in that information? How do you integrate it into yourself if you do? Or, as in the case of this whole book, it talks about, not admitting that you made a mistake. And what the examples were in the book were, like, for example, the judge, was it the judge or the policeman? I can't remember which one it was. Either way, they were literally, even though the evidence was there was such huge evidence against, obviously, the fact that they put this person in prison, they still could not believe it. Yeah. Because that information was such an attack on their self-image,
on their model of the world,
on their model of themselves and their relation to the world, that they could not accept that they were potentially, But the thing is, like, it's an interesting part because it talks about it later in the book, but, like, trying to separate, your behavior from your identity, because at the end of the day, making a mistake isn't you. Everybody makes mistakes. It's just a behavior that you did and it led to a mistake. It's not like your entire self-concept.
Yeah, I think she had a quote here. Yeah. An error does not make a mistake until you refuse to correct it. Yeah, which I quite like, because it is exactly that. It's like, separate the behavior from the act from the person, because, like, a one-off, and it's like, what's that other quote? It's like, doing it once is like an accident, doing it twice is on purpose, or something like that. Or is foolish, or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but
I guess half the point here is, like, if you don't even admit you made a mistake in the first place, you're opening up the chance of doing it again, without any learnings. Yeah, just denial. Yeah,
I was going to try. What's that? I can never remember the name of that thing. The percussion bed or something.
The bed of prosecutors, I think. I'm going to Google it now. I want to know how to pronounce it.
I've never, like, both of us sound fucking stupid because we can never fucking say it properly. But it ties in with that idea that, you have this model. There's kind of a gateway that's like a certain size, and what we're doing is we're stretching our action to basically fit in with that model, rather than updating the whole model. And I think what's interesting is, like...
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it, isn't it? It's the stretching of truth, almost. The stretching of reality to bend to what you want it to be, rather than what it is.
Yeah. Making a circle pole a square or a star, so that it can fit into the whole. And I think what's interesting is that, what she talks about here in the book is, I think it's like the second chapter, is that we're more driven to choose the decision that is more emotionally rewarding. Okay. And so, like, if you think that we are, if we're trying to fit things into our model that says that we're a perfect person, that's going to make us feel better than if we choose to update this kind of model, which is painful because we have to accept that we didn't live up to our standards. Mm-hmm. And it kind of ties in with, like, the EEO, I think, like the expected emotional outcome. We end up of the control heuristic. That's the one that we weigh it up in terms of emotion rather than, like, cognitively, because
is this information going to hurt me if I accept it? Oh, it is. In that case, let's not believe it. Almost. That's kind
exactly.
of like, what evidence can I find to not make this true, therefore I don't have to be in pain. That is pretty much the crux of the attempt to avoid cognitive dissonance. Is like, will this be painful? Yes.
Yeah.
How do I find evidence to prove that it doesn't exist, and therefore make myself not feel the pain almost?
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, I think it's more interesting in this sense as well, because maybe the examples that they gave in the book as well involve this level of like professional pride as well. So it's not even just the fact that they, for example, it's a judge, right? In the sense of this person has been training for years to learn how to be a judge, to understand the law, they believe that their training has led to increased accuracy. And I remember her saying in this book something like, do you know what the only thing that training does? It doesn't increase accuracy, it increases your confidence in your accuracy.
Yeah.
And
which just makes you more sure of what you're saying, basically.
Exactly. And I think it's quite interesting, this, like, because back to the self-concept, self-identity thing, because pride is basically, excessive value in my head towards your self-identity. If you're prideful of something, you take, you hold yourself in high regard for what you can do. And therefore, if you hold yourself in high regard for what you can do, when you can't do what you say you can do, the dissonance levels are high, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think is quite interesting. But maybe this book mainly focuses a lot on, I can't remember if it focuses on every day-to-day stuff, but I remember specifically being like professional pride. It's very hard to get an expert basically to admit they're wrong. And I think that's one of the cruxes of this, is like, the longer somebody's spent their time trying to figure something out, the less likely they are to see the dissonance or accept, models that go against what they think.
Exactly. I think, like, if early on in your career or something, you went 1 degree off your trajectory, okay, well then 20 years later, you're at a very different place than where you would have been. And trying to suddenly make that jump is massive. And you can't really, you can't really suddenly formulate that way. And I think, like, it comes into the amount of investment you put into something. If you put 20 years into your career or something, and then it turns out that something was wrong very early on, then it's very hard to suddenly be like, oh yeah, no, that's okay, well, I'll just suddenly start that now, 20 years in. It's like because then you're seeing that as a loss, which is dangerous, because then experts become more, they double down, and then they say, no, it is correct. I know this, I've been doing it for 20 years, and they don't accept that they started making a problem 20 years ago, which can be quite dangerous. And once again, it ties into that idea that, like, if you're at the top of the value structure, you've got more to lose, you've got further to fall.
If you've worked your ass off to get to the top of a field or industry, information which discredits anything you've done is an attack essentially on your position. And no wonder you get this, like, loss-averse based behavior, which is, either bend the truth or not admit the truth. Because if you were to admit it, you're coming down the pecking order, or at least you project yourself, or you project that as the reality of admitting, if you get me. Like, if you admit that, oh wow, I'm going to fall down, like, my professional career is going to be in jeopardy because I made a mistake.
Which is like kind of scary when you think that that's basically just not adapting to change, or not adapting to the actual environment. And if you consider that most of these systems are just made up of individuals themselves, like, they stand for one single unitary thing, but, like, they're actually made up of multiple people. But if everyone's going along the same kind of path,
I've been usually like, as well, this is quite funny. So this, like the self-justification thing, like lobbyists and stuff. Do you reckon they, like, justify it to themselves as their salesman? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, how do you justify, like, these people who do, like, corrupt stuff, like, in my head, they pay people. I reckon they must have some level of, like, sick justification where they're like, I don't know, like.
But it's so hard for us to kind of understand their way of thinking, because they're so far from us. Do you get what I mean? As in, like, their way of thinking is like, they think that they're right, and they've justified it to themselves.
It's interesting, because she does talk about this idea, though, that you may be able to justify it to yourself, but there's always part of your soul that won't agree with it.
Well,
I think this is quite interesting because I think Peterson talks about it mainly, like this idea of like, even if you're reducing this dissonance, you tend to not feel content with your life, almost as weird as it sounds. If you continually bend the truth to fit or to suit yourself, there's some part of you, right, that does know that you're doing that.
Well, that's
if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think when you end up choosing and making these mistakes and not kind of owning up to them, you're almost going in like a false direction. You haven't actually grown your initial beliefs. Like, they're real, they're raw. Okay. What instead you've done is created this kind of false trajectory, and you're following that. And I think what's interesting is that when we react to things, we probably still react with our raw self, our kind of like actual values, but then straight after we're like, no, shut up. And we justify it with something else, and it's like, I think, if I did an action, if one of the lobbyists did like an action and then they compared it to like the whole world and they realized, wow, I just made this for 50 million or something like that, then the initial reaction would be like, it's probably terrible, but then they would justify it straight after. So it's like, I think the initial reaction is the real soul speaking, in a way, if you get what I mean. That's their original kind of values that haven't grown because they've just been going in like a false direction.
Isn't it? Yeah, I think it's interesting. I know we always mention it, but like Peterson's perspective, like the integration, like if you follow what your soul or like what you're first impelled to do, you'll feel better in life. You'll feel more content. It's almost like, I think Freud and stuff all talked about this idea of repression, which basically is that it's repressing this urge deep down in you, the instinct of what you know to be true or know to be correct, but you repress it and you fill that gap with essentially lies or some form of lie, which is like flimsy truth. If you kind of get me, like, deep down that it's not. But then also, by the way, I'm saying this, but there's also people out there who would genuinely believe it to be true. So there's also like, it's not 100% that some of these people know they're doing wrong, because I guess some of it is they literally cannot face the fact that it might not be true, if that makes sense, or like they cannot personally accept the fact that whatever this information is true in any such like way. It will literally destroy them, if that makes sense. Like they cannot conceive that it's true because it's almost impossible to them. Which is interesting.
Well, it's what you talk about in terms of what is the axiom tree.
Yeah, well, is that it's basically just built up a load of like a reasoning where like I'm a good person and all this evidence in this world, right? So from this very core belief that I behave in a way that makes me, I'm a competent person, right? You have all the behaviors in your entire life that are linked to this bottom bit. If somebody chops it, that means all those behaviors need to find a new place to exist in your brain. Because I think Peterson, I don't know if it's, I need to understand the neuroscience better, but he does say there is like a physiological, like, think about it. If your brain is obviously the structure it is, and memories and beliefs are basically circuits. If there's one circuit that like leads to the rest, right? Let's just think of it like a chain. Yeah. If you then have to cut it off at the bottom of the chain, you have like a load of sporadic, beliefs and experiences that don't have a root anymore. That makes sense. At least that's how I think of it. I don't know how legitimate that is, but if you visualize it like that, you can see how if somebody gets you right at the bottom of your belief system, like where everything else is attached to, then you'd have all these random beliefs like flowing around, and that's why your body feels anxious, because it's trying to figure out where all these beliefs belong. It's like your whole brain's going like, fuck, like what the fuck am I doing? Like where are all these experiences now that I'm not competent, now that I'm not this thing I thought I was? Where does my life stand? And this is this whole idea of like, the betrayal that he always talks about. Like if you're betrayed, right, you have this, let's just say as a partner, because it's the most obvious example. You have all these memories built up with your partner, and they are all based on this one tree, which is like trust and love. The moment you're betrayed, that then comes into question at the very bottom, like what was this all about? And that's when you feel the anxiety, because your brain is trying to reintegrate all this, now mess of information, which it can't understand, because if they loved you, why did they betray you?
Yeah.
That makes sense. And that's where it is similar to this cognitive dissonance thing here. It's like this event happened. It is improbable to me, or I do not know how this event has happened. And if it attacks one of the core things about like yourself, then your brain just struggles, or like it basically panics and tries to figure out where all this new where all that information that was once attached to this fits in. If you're following me.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting, I still haven't read the book, and I'm gonna have to get around to reading it like in the next couple of weeks. But a book called Shattered Assumptions.
Okay.
Um,
Oh yes, no, I know of
because
it.
basically it's this whole idea of the axiom tree, which we keep bringing up quite a lot recently. And this idea, obviously, like these core beliefs we have, like you're just saying, this very core of everybody, which then, when challenged, you know, or when proven to be the case. So, for example, I think ones are like, I think the three they give in the book, which I'm just going off the back from what I've read, was like, we are all competent, we are all inherently good people, and we are all something else. But basically, it's the belief that we all come into the world and we all sort of, to a degree, like the most people I met, if I ask them, "Are you a good person?" they say yes, right?
Yeah.
So the point here being is we have these very core traits of I'm a good person and I'm competent, and then obviously your life forms these, and then obviously whatever forms on top of these trees becomes like your self concept to a degree, or comes like your belief at your abilities at things. And therefore, when this cognitive dissonance, like you make a mistake, right? And let's just say you've built up this really, especially if you're in a profession like a judge, like I said earlier, you have a professional pride built up on this tree of how competent am I? And you've built up this massive tree of like, I've gone to uni, I've studied, I've done this, I've studied law, I'm now a judge, I've solved this many cases, I am like this person with all this great,
Hello?
evident. Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry, your sound just dropped out. Yeah.
So you got all this evidence based off this like original tree of am I competent? And therefore, when something comes in which really like disrupts it, in the sense of like I've done all these great achievements, and now look at this one which doesn't agree. Like I'll give you an example of my personal life. Like, well, I don't know if I'm gonna talk. Wait, am I going to talk about it? But I guess, for example, if I think about things I've done in the past that were like mistakes, maybe I find it very hard to even find my big mistakes, right? Or something that you could classify as a big mistake, because it's almost like not repressed, but it's something I've like chosen to forget or like not accept almost in a weird way. And I think we all have a level of that where like maybe you did something in the past which because you've grown so much since it, you're like, oh, why the hell did I do that? And it's we all have that trait in us where it's like we ignore anything which doesn't build up that self-concept, because it's this idea that we are quite binary thinkers, and I'm also thinking aloud here, like the idea that you can't be good and evil. Whereas Peterson argues you need to have a really sophisticated idea of yourself, which is both good and bad. Whereas most people only have their just a belief that they're good. And therefore anything that comes in and hits it saying, actually, you have this side to you, which is quite bad, really fucks with their, tree of competence or tree of morality that they built up throughout their whole life. And it's pretty deep, but do you kind of get...
Yeah, no, I follow. I think what it should be, right, is that you're just you. Mm-hmm. There's no label of good and bad, but you have the possibility to be bad. If you follow just your trajectory, you know that you have the possibility to justify things, and you can end up being bad that way if you follow that track. And if what's Jordan Peterson's course, right? What's it? Self-authoring.
Yeah.
Isn't the whole idea that you go through your past to try and integrate them and then basically find your new kind of direction, basically. And that's kind of it. You're seeing what trajectory you're going in. You follow it all the way back to where you've made that first kind of mistake. You integrate that all into your model, and then you continue on in the direction that you should have been going. That's basically, that's kind of how I'm seeing it. Is that similar to what you were thinking?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of you add it, and then you change direction from the addition of onto your sort of belief tree almost. Is that
yeah,
kind of what
yeah,
I think so. But it's also, I guess, I don't know, it's a fine line to be like, I'm just trying to think here. There's a fine line between adding something and also adding something which is not true, if you get me. Or
not true in terms of what sense?
Like in the sense of like, if you are like this whole cognitive dissonance thing, like, you got this tree and you got to add things onto it to change your path. I'm talking about if you add things on which just confirm rather than like this confirmation bias thing. Like if you just keep doing it and if you just don't challenge your tree in any sense, or when I say the word tree, I'm just thinking of like beliefs about yourself. If you don't ever challenge it, how can you ever have the possibility of growth in the sense of, I guess...
Okay, yeah, I get you. So what you mean if you're always following in the same direction, how do you know it's the right direction?
Yeah, kind of thing. Because I wonder whether the midlife crisis is triggered by the fact that you followed your thing to one direction completely, and then you're like, fucking hell, is this all there was to this direction? And I don't know if we're even talking about the same thing here anymore. Like, we've kind of moved from like belief trees to like life trajectory because of it. And
well, I get that. I think it's made up of your identity, really, or your like core identity, or who you see yourself as, that kind of identity. And so that's constantly, through all experiences that we're having, we're constantly updating our identity, and we should be like, our identity should be fluid. And so no matter what direction it is, at least it's congruent with who you want to be. I don't think it necessarily has to just go in the direction of like honesty, although that may be like, one of your traits that you hold high. But I think we all have this idea of who we want to be so that we're kind of accepted in society and, we're the best version of ourselves. And I think that's why all these kind of self-help books and Jordan Peterson and all that lot, it's basically just like stoicism. It's all like, be the best person you can be. And like, he talks about it in terms of like the meta goal. And the meta goal is like some abstract concept that we would like to be. And so the only way we can do that is by integrating and being ourselves in order to try and find it, if you get what I mean. It's like,
I think a lot of their sort of mentality is like life's to be found in adversity, and where there's adversity, there's growth, I think is an interesting idea. Like if you're always looking for like to challenge painful things head on, you will be rewarded in a weird way, if that makes sense. I think that's like half of their meta like life credo, like find adversity, overcome absurd. Like I think, what is it, the Ryan Holiday who like takes stuff from Stoicism and like makes it he popularizes Stoicism, in this day and age. He has a book called like The Obstacle is the Way, and that's like this idea that the obstacles are what get you to the end destination. So don't hide from them. Like, you made a mistake, that's the obstacle. Face it, see it for what it is, and then bring your learnings from that into yourself and move forward. And that's where meaning is going to be found, in overcoming or battling it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the hurdles can look quite scary, and because there's an element of unknown there, and we love to be in control, and so normally we conform to the idea or the belief that basically gives us the emotional, like a good emotion, and makes us feel in control. Like our model is perfect, and that's how the world is run, rather than actually like dealing with the real world. So a lot of it, I think, is about like, trying to feel in control. But when you let go of that and you go with the experience, you're able to grow. That's, just because you're in control doesn't mean you're growing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like, we could have this conversation another time. I think there's something really interesting in this idea of like, it's not relevant to this book, but I would love to discuss this. This whole Peterson meta thing with the growth and the idea of like, every time you meet an obstacle, part of you dies and part of you transforms and becomes new. And I like the Phoenix. I hate how. But this is also so interesting how it's been drilled into me that like religion and spiritual, like, or symbolic things are non-scientific. And I just look at it and I think, oh, this sounds all airy fairy. But it is really interesting, this idea of like, stuff happens in your life and it transforms you. You become a different person from it. And you're always going through these meta transformations. And the idea of that Peterson, everybody always talks about, is facing up to these transformations and, doing it. If this information comes in and it conflicts with who you are, you need to find a way to bring it together with who you previously thought you were, to create a more integrated, as we always say, whole, other than distorting what's coming in to fit your original self and never changing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think we can definitely have a chat about that in more depth, maybe even a own research on that, because I think once you finish Beyond Order, it'd be pretty useful if we, deep dive into that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think where else. I mean, to be honest, the rest of this, do you know what? Shit, there's actually a load more to this book that I forgot about. So like self-justification and relationships, I've got here, and then I got memory and distortion.
Memory.
The brain is often conceptualized as like a computer, right? And therefore memory, because of mapping onto that metaphor, has always been thought of as a brain as a sort of like, not objective, but like a very accurate recalling of things that happened. But I mean, you know this from your psychology, right? Memory is not...
It's faulty as fuck.
It's faulty. Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
It's really faulty. And like, last week I literally had a lecture on false memories. And basically, you know, what we can remember something that didn't happen, or we can not remember something that did happen. And especially with like in regards to this book, it's kind of like a push and pull. We're pushing something down and pulling something up. So something might have happened, but we're pushing that down, and we're pulling something that's not that didn't happen up. And I made a note here where like we tell stories all the time, right? Stories are basically just our memories. But our memories have to fit that story format. And if we're telling stories and we want to get feedback from the audience or whatever, it has to be somewhat, you know, exciting. So we leave some details out and we exaggerate others. And depending on how our audience responds, exactly. And depending on how our audience responds, determine, like, that's the feedback. And then it's like, oh, well, they didn't laugh here or something, or they didn't find this interesting, so I'm going to exaggerate that next time.
Yeah, and the story changes over time because of it, right?
Yeah.
But then you become to believe your own lies if it actually happened. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point.
And it's a cycle, and it just keeps going on and on and on until we can't really remember the past. And like, you know, our memories don't last very long. Like, although there's a capacity, like long-term memory doesn't really have a capacity, it doesn't mean that bits of it don't decay over time. You know, if I haven't told a story of me when I was 10 since I was 10, well then, you know, that 14 years has passed. I'm not going to remember it in the same detail as if it was yesterday.
Yeah. Well, for sure, mate. Well, first of all, I don't think you can remember anything by 10, really.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty... Yeah. I'm trying to think what else you got from memory. I think that it was one of the first books which properly debunked this whole idea of memory, you know, being accurate, basically. I always knew it was relatively accurate, but then obviously it talks a lot about how memory, obviously you could just, based on, I guess the best way of thinking about it is like, you know, memory can change based on the end result of something. So for example, in like a story, right? Let's say somebody slaved away for years and then at the end of the day, there's a happy ending. Therefore, the memory of that will be more rosy because it'd be like the effort before the win, or the effort before, you know, the happy ending. So like, it's interesting to think that, you know, somebody who works their ass off for 20 years of their life, looks back on it and never achieved anything, that memory would be really sad that they did that. Whereas somebody who worked their ass off their whole life and then achieved something great, the memory would be much more rosier. Like that was like, you know, the engine of my success sort of thing. And the memories are basically changed by the current state, as weird as that sounds.
Well, no, absolutely. Like, think about it. Okay, you've got a perspective of the world that's constantly changing depending on what your goals are, what you're doing, etc. And if we use our memories to help us get there, you know, then we're going back in through all our memories with a certain lens, you know? And so it's like, oh, I'm thinking this. And then we look through our memories and we pull out the information that is relevant to what we're looking for. So we're constantly distorting our memories depending on what our current state is. And a lot of the time we also make the past seem worse than it actually is in order to make us seem better. You know, like we've improved or like we've grown or we've done this, because we would hate to realize that we've actually got worse at something over time. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's what I was already saying a second ago. Like, just by distorting memories, people can get what they want by revising what they had. And what they want to do is turn their present bleak or merely mundane lives into dazzling victories over adversity.
Yeah. But what's ridiculous is that you're taking your current position and you're distorting the stuff around you to make it seem like you are.
That's interesting as well. Yeah, like they talked about this idea of like, you know, if you're currently feeling down and like, you know, the world's got you down, your memory will then look for ideas of why is your life a mess. And that's when false memories can come into play. Like, and that's when he talks about this idea of like, if you see yourself as a victim now and you go back to the past, you then look for external circumstances to make you a victim. And then you start downplaying your role in your part in your life. So I think they talked a lot about this idea of parent blaming as a convenient form of self-justification for when your life didn't turn out the way you wanted it to. So it allows you to live with your, you know, imperfections. Like, let's just say, you know, your parents maybe forced you into doing a specific job. And then, you know, your life became a bit of a mess and you look back and go like, oh my God, it's all their fault. When in reality, like, you always had the choice, like you always did have a choice to say no or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And then you tend to look back and put it on other people rather than realizing that every single moment, every single day, you do have a choice. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there are probably constraints for some people and that isn't the same for everybody. That's a caveat, because I'm sure you could come up with counter arguments. But for the majority of people over the space of 20, 30 years, if you say you don't have a choice in your life, you're definitely lying to one person. That's your fucking self.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. Like, there's a good point here where she was saying, like, by reducing cognitive dissonance, we choose the option that makes us least look like a perpetrator. And instead, like, so if you're a perpetrator, you try to get over it really quickly. Okay, you try to, like, you know, just slot it into your model and get over it. Whereas if you're a victim, you end up dragging it out. And what was it? Where is it here? Yeah, perpetrators are motivated to reduce their moral culpability. Victims are motivated to maximize their moral blamelessness.
Interesting. Yeah, like the fact that moral blamelessness. Yeah, they use it to sort of justify why they're like so moral and how they, you know, it's not their fault that they're in the position they're in.
Yeah.
It is mad to think that that's like. I mean, sometimes I get into these little rabbit holes where I think about stuff like this, and it never ends. There is no like, what's the word? Truth to something. It's just like, it is all belief at the end of the day. Like. And that's why I think it's so interesting. The more I think about how much of a mindset or like a personal philosophy is to your life. Like, if you're the type of person who, you know, believes in like the Stoic sort of arguments of self-responsibility and getting on with things, that's an interesting idea. So instead of this IQ way of differential, you know, life performances, measuring people's internal philosophies and self-beliefs and how they perform over the course of their life would be interesting. Are you in a self-defeating mindset or are you in a self-enhancing mindset? Because to me, it's, you know, you can see people a mile away who are in either or.
Yeah, but like the way I see it is like all these different types of philosophies, they all pretty much do the same exact thing. They're basically just trying to keep you on track with yourself and how, like, who you want to be. You know, it's all about being, you know, the best version of yourself in the moment. And so all of these kind of philosophies, they have different rules to them, but it's basically to just make sure that you don't step off the path, you know?
Yeah.
And that you like, and just constantly instill the idea that, you know, just integrating adversity is good for you. And, you know, they all do it in different ways, but they all basically just use different language. Like,
have you ever read the growth mindset book? Well, the book that's called it's just called Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Oh, I know of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think that was one of my original books as well. It's just really interesting. She just talks about like the two different mindsets: is the people who do stuff for growth and believe in growth and don't believe in like hereditary ability to a degree. Like, don't get me wrong, I think there is some level of like hereditary ability in the sense of like you got the extremes of somebody who's got Down syndrome, you got the other extreme of somebody who's incredibly intelligent, right? Like, so that it does exist that there is differential abilities in many things, right? But this idea of mindset by Carol Dweck was that, you know, the people who actually outperformed everybody in life are the ones who just approach everything with this idea of, you know, I can grow.
Yeah. But I think this book just suggests that basically anyone can be a victim to this, because it always starts off with something tiny. You know, it's always so small, and you just make one wrong move and then it makes the next thing easier. And it's like atomic habits. It's like, it's easy to start these bad habits. And then once they're ingrained, it's like, you don't even know that you have this habit. You know, you just see it as part of your behavior. and it's like an automatic response.
I think what's interesting there as well is if you built up this whole life of self-justification, like I said before, it's incredibly painful to take the dissonance of actually, you had a chance in your whole life to, make this better, but you chose to ignore it. And that must be pretty painful.
Yeah. And it's like, but it's like anyone that like kind of turns to substances to kind of drown out something. It's like, it's constantly bombarding you and you don't want to hear it because it's painful. And the more you do it, the more painful it becomes. So the more you take, and it's just going on and on and on. Which is like, it's so sad because obviously people don't get dealt the same hand when they're born. So some people have to cut corners, or like a lot of people cut corners to try and make ends meet and things like that. But the problem is that the system is basically generating, people to self-justify and then and lead them on the wrong kind of path. And this is the problem with these systems, is that if the systems have problems in it, then anyone that's in that system who is following along that path is going in the wrong path. And that's why you need these systems that are self-regulating and kind of, make sure that they're held accountable, because then it kind of directs everyone else on the same path. And it is really important. Otherwise you just end up getting a whole society that they're all just, not really following in the right direction that we should be, or they should be, as an individual.
Yeah. But I guess that's the whole, underlying ethos of the the left and right divide of responsibility vs collective responsibility. So sole responsibility vs collective.
I was talking to Liam the other day, and we were talking about how societies are basically just, their shared values have just been eroded away. And we don't really have many shared values anymore, apart from the fact that we're part of a capitalistic society and we just make money and go to work. There's no communal aspect anymore. There's no communities. There's no neighborhoods. No one hangs around with anyone outside of a tiny, tiny vicinity. Their circle has shrunk so that it's so individualized that we just pursue that. And the problem is that now we don't have any of these goals, these overarching goals to have chivalry. Chivalry's dead. Let's be honest, and all these kind of all of these kind of morals that we used to hold really highly, and that was kind of built on trust and character, have now eroded away. And we have to be told by a rule to kind of what we should do. And it's kind of sad because it means everything else is worthless apart from the one thing that we're told to do. Yeah.
No, I see that. I see that for sure. I'm just trying to map it onto this is kind of off the topic of the book, but map it onto the whole purpose of religion as well. In a sense, it gave life a relative meaning, and that your actions mattered because it was all part of every good action you took was a tick on the scoreboard to go to heaven. Whereas now, good action, what's it rewarded with if somebody else is, behaving immorally? I don't know. There's a good book you might want to check out called Selfie, and it's why the West has become selfish.
No, I know the one. I need to read it. I guess you could relate it to what we were talking about earlier on with I've got my subjective reality, you've got yours, where they overlap and where they don't overlap. But I guess our realities are also based off our held values.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So my reality is naturally going to be different from yours. And we used to have more of a shared reality, if you get what I mean. If we used to have
that's interesting, by the way, in the idea of the Piaget, how do people learn rules? They play. And he talks about voluntary games and involuntary games. He talks about how social rules, social dynamics come from just meeting people, and you're sussing each other out. You're sussing what rules to abide by, what can be said, what can't be said. And when you're right, when you don't have this sense of community, you can't learn the community's rules. You can just learn the bigger picture rules, which we get indoctrinated in through school, I guess.
Yeah.
Interestingly. I know you learn that there's reward and punishment based on abiding by the rules. Yet a load of people break the law in small ways. Like, for example, the civil disobedience thing, like how everybody's like technically not listening to the law in COVID, which is interesting because doesn't that erode any belief in the law when you can't be punished? It's teaching you to get away with it.
I was listening to what's his name, Lord Sumption, and he was like, well, like you know, you have a legal right to follow these laws, but you don't have a moral right. Yeah. And the problem is that these laws have been put in place that are so ridiculous. It's like 10 years for trying to do something that they're so see-through, and it devalues the value of these laws being put in place, because if they're just putting in laws for no fucking reason, well, then why should we listen to them? They don't hold value anymore. And so then you get loads of people that disregard laws, but then the problem is that, well, then it might go too far. Maybe they disregard all laws. And you're kind of fucking up the trust within the system because they're just fucking around with it constantly. So yeah, it gets me.
Yeah. No, mate, that all makes sense to me. I haven't really formulated many thoughts around it. I've always tried now to go from like the very first, well, not first principles, but I try and like, you know, the PhD, how do we learn how to behave? Like the rule-based socialization by, you know, playing with other people and understanding what other people abide by, and then we infer that because they're abiding by it, that means it's a rule, and it wouldn't be good to break it.
Like
interesting.
Rules.
Yeah, and then you build them up, and then you get a society, like a load of mini games. It's quite interesting. Because I wonder whether, you know, there ever was this one big collective agreement. This is back to what I said to you the other day when I saw, you know, there's some dodgy people on the street, or who I classify as dodgy, because I know immediately that they're not playing the same games I am, just by the sense of the way they carry themselves. In a weird way that sounds, I can immediately tell that, okay, this guy, this stranger, is not playing by a rule that I play by. Therefore, he represents danger or, you know, possibility, a bit like what Peterson talks about, because I can't. He's not something I'm used to. Therefore, I'm wary. If as weird as that sounds.
Yeah.
And I find that quite interesting.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I think that's good actually.
But anyway, mate, let's get back to the end of this book. I mean, we've gone from obviously cognitive dissonance, self-justification, and then in the book itself, I mean, I'm not going to go down to the end because we've already talked about like the blame game and stuff, and like you know, taking responsibility and not, you know, pushing it onto others, which is one of the central like sort of messages of the book. But now let's just talk about self-justification in relationships, because I thought it was quite interesting as well.
Yeah.
It's interesting in the sense of, and once again, Peterson talks about this type of thing. So like, if you're unhappy in a relationship, people tend to like tolerate the other person, or they tolerate the things that annoy them, and then they reduce the dissonance potentially by saying, oh, it's just this one time, or, you know, oh, they've always been like that. And like this idea that, you know, the self-justification is the obviously removal of facing the pain or dealing with the problem, a bit like what you're saying earlier about how you don't treat the problem, you just kind of like you putting a plaster on it instead of treating it, right? Yeah. And that's literally what self-justification is doing in relationships, in the sense of like, and this is what Peterson talks about in his new book about the fog. Don't hide things in the fog. This idea of like, just say it. If something's like, if you're tolerating something that you know you shouldn't be, don't come up with self-justifications. Literally say it out loud, like, this is really annoying me. Because then at least the two people, like obviously your partner in the relationship, can at least battle it out to like, I mean, battle it out is probably the wrong word, maybe dance it out. About what it is that's really bothering them. And then you deal with the problem up front rather than rationalizing it until that problem has become a massive problem.
Well, it's the dragons under the rug or in the house, isn't it? Yeah. It's like that whole thing. It's like if you don't solve it quickly, it's going to grow and grow and grow, and then it's going to manifest in different ways. And this is one of the notes that I made about this, was that when you just filter something into your model and you don't update your model, you're not changing your behavior. You're doing the same exact thing. So if your behavior is actually causing a problem, it's still going to be present because you haven't actually learned the lesson. You haven't actually integrated it and updated. You know, you haven't done the whole phoenix, the die and come back to life. Mm-hmm. So your problem will constantly manifest itself, and then you'll just justify, and then before you know it, it becomes a massive problem. That's why you see in all these so many relationships that the same problem is just occurring over and over and over again, and then it's seeping into all different contexts, and it's kind of tainting everything until it's such a big problem, and then you can't because you've gone so far, you can't accept it then.
And interestingly as well, is if you've never spoken about it with the person, you never can refine what the actual problem is.
Yeah.
Because you could basically, somebody, they might not do the dishes right. Okay, let's just say that's an example. And then you start assuming it's because, they're a lazy person. And then you build up this entire sort of belief system that they're a lazy person, they don't do this and that. And then you speak to them. And then because you've never voiced your opinion about why it annoyed you or that it even annoyed you, they just thought you were happy with clearing up after them. And it's not even the fact that they were lazy, it's because your assumptions were never tested. And this is the whole point of if you don't have this critical negative feedback, or if you don't have any feedback at all, because you're too busy creating justifications for the existence within your own mind without externalizing it and finding out if it's true or not, you can end up in some seriously, not dark places, but bad positions where the problem is now blown way out of proportion, and you resent the person now because you built up this whole entire library of behaviors that have pissed you off, yet you've never ever voiced your opinion on why you're annoyed.
It's ridiculous to think that people are going to suddenly know what you're thinking if you've never voiced it.
That's one of my favorite examples. I always do that now in arguments of am I supposed to? I'm not a mind reader. That's not I'm not here to read your mind. I'm not on this planet to read your mind. So you tell me what the problem is. Literally.
Yeah.
It's actually entitlement that even thinks I'm here to respond to your little, let's just say it was, somebody who was pouting or something. I'm not here to, decode your pouting because you're upset with me. I'm here to, discuss if something's upset with you so we can figure out a plan of action between us. I'm not here like a professional FBI body reader and reading your body language to discern that you're pissed off, if that makes sense. And that's what a lot of people, that's an interesting point as well, because it's this cognitive dissonance is could impact you in the sense of you like to think, okay, right, your self-identity is you're somebody who is nice and doesn't like conflict. Therefore, you don't bring up these things because you're afraid of conflict, or you're afraid that you will be seen as somebody who wants to have conflict because you believe you're not. And that's where this is where this cognitive dissonance comes in again. You can't behave like that. You've limited yourself because you can't. Yeah. You say to yourself, "I can't do conflict. I'm not." Yeah. And then you build up resentment. Yeah.
That's the whole sensitive thing. You sensitize yourself to something because you never accepted it in the first place, and now you're further and further away, so it has more of an impact. And you're like, well, I can't do that now. I can't deal with the conflict. I've already told myself and made some stupid rule.
And then obviously this is back to the other point. Once you've built up that too much, then it's very hard to admit that maybe the whole time you were wrong. This is what I do love. I do love this idea of this idea that actually it does take courage to sometimes look at stuff which causes pain, but it's always worth it. It's the courageous person who looks at the truth and then integrates the truth, who's always the hero in the hero stories. This is the Peterson point. And the more I think about it, the more it's true. It's always the person who tackles the problem head on and deals with it, deals with the pain, works out a plan of action, does something about it that ends up being the person somebody respects. Nobody respects the person who keeps quiet and builds up resentment, builds up their victimhood, and then cries about it and complains about it. The people who respect other people, people respect people who do and have courage.
Absolutely. But those are basically the virtuous traits, courage, honor, all these different ones. Those are things that, and I guess you could tie it back to Jordan Peterson in terms these are the heroes. These are why the stories have been passed down, because everyone can relate to them and they're incredibly high held attributes. And this is the whole idea, is that by having freedom to make mistakes and be have the perception of mistakes as a good thing, as they hold growth, or like, you know, basically problems or adversity holds growth. That's a lesson that everyone needs to be taught from an early age. The problem is that schools are very conditioning, and it's like all about getting the right answer, and that's about it. But the problem is that, okay, you start that then, but once again, all these things are cumulative. All these people grow up, and whether they're in like big systems or not, or big corporations, whatever, the whole system becomes like that because that's how they've been taught. You know, so then people can't make mistakes in those systems, and then the systems can't, you know, regulate themselves, and they can't be updated. And it's all this, it's this constant cycle. And like, that's the kind of thing. It's like mistakes are made, but like mistakes can be made. It's just that you should learn from them. And I think that's what crime needs to be taught, realistically.
Or that mistakes are made and they have valuable information within them.
Yeah.
Yeah, mistakes are made, and you should probably look at it and take it seriously, and then understand what mistake was made, and then don't make the mistake again. That's a pretty good book title.
Yeah. Carol Tavris will be proud.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, leave a comment. Let us know what you thought. You know, give us a like, give us a follow, give us a subscribe, and we will be eternally grateful. Plus, you will get to be made aware when we next bring out a podcast. Next week, we are bringing out one of our Rome recaps, followed by another book review. And stay tuned, because we are actually updating our YouTube at the moment, and we are going to be bringing out content about the skills that we've learnt in certain books, our favourite books, things that we're currently reading, and a lot more. So please do stay tuned, and we'll see you next time.